In this 6th video, we go back to a concept called slicing. It's very close to the concept of what are called substrings, strings within strings. And what we're going to do is work through a very simple example. Okay, let's say that you ask a user to input a first name and a surname. Okay, let's keep it all lowercase, right? So Jack, and we'll make it Jones. Okay, nice and straightforward name. First name and what we're going to do is write a very, very simple application using slicing, which will, oops, I've got rid of the J, which will take the first 5 characters of the surname and add the first letter of the first name and capitalize it. So let's have a look how we would do that. First of all, how do you get hold of different parts of a string? Well, look at the first name. Right. If you just print first name, there it is, Jack. If you print first name with this 0, 1, what happens? It gives you the first letter. 0, 2, what happens? It gives you the first 2 letters. 0, 3, it gives you the first 3 letters. So if in our password application we want the first one, that's what we want. We want the J from the first name, right? So let's just play with this. If you want to go to the surname, and what you want to do is not take a fixed number of characters, because different surnames have different lengths. You want to take everything except for the last one. What we can do is, now this is an interesting thing, right? I don't know how long your surname is, so if I just go 0, 4 randomly, see what happens. I got Joan. That was a lot. What happens if the name is longer than that? Right, let's say it is Smith. What happens there? I get Smith, that's fine. What happens if it's Smith hyphenated Jones? Say that's your surname. It actually just gives me Smith. What I want for my password app is everything except for the last letter. Okay, when we have a long surname. So the idea that you just start at 0 and you just pick the number of lengths of the surname is not going to help me. Now Python has a very clever tool. Let's see if I can illustrate it by running something with it. Bear with me a second. If I use the correct syntax, it would help and not lose all my syntax. Right, shift that there. Right, so that's a colon and I've magically added a letter. Right, let's run that. Bear with me a second. Now, this is quite a tricky concept, and as you can see, I'm making a bit of a botch in trying to demonstrate it to you. So let's run it again. Oh, didn't like that either. Surname, let's try that. What I'm trying to do is try to illustrate to you how negative indexes work. Now, the reason that, oops, I can tell you why I'm making a mistake. I'm simply leaving out a closed square bracket. So let's try it again. Oh, that's interesting. We need to comment that out so it doesn't confuse what we're up to here. Right, have a look at this. N. Which letter was that? That's the third one in from the N. 1, 2, 3. Interesting. What happens if I put a negative 1 in? It gives me an S. What happens if I go from 0 to negative 4? Where will that lead me to? Let's play with that. Smith Jones. So it started there, and come 4 letters back. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's given me everything else. That's interesting. That negative index is actually a very clever way of going to the end of the string and counting backwards. So what do you think I would need to put into here if I wanted to just get the whole surname except the last character? Have a look at that. Smith Jones. Let's change the length of that. Let's change it to my surname. Okay, and run that. And you notice that it takes them all except for the last character. Very, very useful. So the length of this string here, this useful little trick here, which is, now the reason I played with it and showed you all the mistakes, it's actually quite tricky to get it absolutely right. Look, you might put a negative in the first category. Let's see what happens if you do it by just playing and making a simple mistake. And let's say we put a 4 in there. Right, say you're not quite sure how to use it. Oh, it doesn't do anything at all. Let's just say you use it on its own. V is interesting. It's actually just picked the very last character. So if I were to do a -2 here, I'm guessing it's going to pick the character 1 before the very last. So do you see, this negative is a little bit tricky to manipulate, and it's worth playing with. So what we seem to have discovered is if you start at 0, the first, and you go right to the end except the very last one, right, and run it, it'll give you that. Now, what I want to do is let's use a different surname, right? And a different first name. Let's uncomment that and see whether this gives us what I want. Yes, the first letter and the first part, the surname. Now, why am I doing it like this when I'm playing with it? Why am I not writing it into it? Why am I using the print statements? Because the print statement is the easiest way to get it right. So actually, what I want to do is I make up your username by taking the surname and popping it there. Okay. And then, because they're strings, we're going to hope Python is clever. It's going to take the first letter of your first name, and then we're going to display that. Okay, so let's see whether this works. So if I print this username, will my system work? It has, but here's the thing. I need that first letter capitalized and that letter capitalized. Can you remember how to do it? Well, this is a string, so actually if you use the dot notation and go and find for the surname, well, not the surname, we only want the first letter capitalized, and actually the code is, oops, he says keeps on jumping past it, capitalize. The function capitalize will capitalize the first letter, but the first name can all be made into an upper. So let's have a look at that and see whether we've solved this problem. There we go. Now here's an interesting thing. Can we change the length of the surname, and let's assume that it's all coming in lowercase or uppercase, doesn't really matter, we're not particularly worried about that. And there's your first name, and let's test that out. Does that work? It does exactly. And this is actually the format of a lot of password engines when they're giving you passwords. So this is a very, very good way of seeing how you would use splicing or substrings in order to build a new value. And a password, finding a password, is a very, very useful trick indeed to do.